Welcome. My mother always said, don't discuss religion, politics, or money in polite company. Well, today we're going to dive into 2 out of 3 of the controversial topics. Welcome with me today, Representative DeMargo. Welcome.
Thank you, Holly. It's good to be here.
Yeah, well, thanks for coming down and taking time out of your busy schedule. You know, this whole issue of politics and faith in the public discourse is one that has come to the front burner in a big way in the last several years. And I'm wondering, do you think that faith has a role in the public discourse and in politics, or should we not be discussing that? Should it not be an issue?
Well, from my perspective, and maybe it's the way I grew up, I didn't accept Christ as my Savior until 4 days after my 21st birthday, when I was a junior in college. And I really wasn't raised in a home that you would call a Christian home, per se. It wasn't that way. And so the first time I owned a Bible, I'm 21 years old, you know, or read one, I should say. I had one, but read one. So everything, my basis of faith in lordship begins from that point forward, when I just said, you know, basically, Lord, I'm an open slate, so if I'm going to step out in faith, then I'm going to allow you to lead. So I don't compartmentalize. I mean, to me, people are what they are. You're the same in your personal life as you are in your private life, or should be. So whether you say, as a public servant, a politician, elected official, to me, you are what you are. You're either grounded in faith or not. I think sometimes we get into, I'm not qualified to go out and become preach as a theologian, but I can talk about my own life and my own faith and my own growth.
Do you think that's relevant? Do you think that's relevant to what you do as a representative?
Oh, absolutely. I think it defines who you are. As I said, I reiterate, you are what you are. I mean, if you're a professing believer, then you step out in faith and the Lord directs.
So you think that perhaps people make too much of the fact that someone may be Jewish or Christian or Mormon or evangelical, or you know, do you think those labels matter in the political arena? Well,
I think that the qualities that the individual exhibits, and does he or she exhibit the fruits of, you know, lordship, you know, Galatians 5. I mean, does it show up or not? I think that's, you are what, I'm sorry to sound like a broken record or redundant, but it really, you know, when an employer is hiring someone, the best determination of whether their future performance will be their past performance. So look at it. Now, people make mistakes, and I'm in favor of redemption and go forth and all that. However, in the overall context of this, you are what you are. Your past performance will dictate your future performance. If you are a person who is a follower of Christ and anchored as such, and you make decisions along that way, then I think that's a good value test to compare to someone who maybe doesn't toe the same line and behave in the same way.
Now, how does that play out actually in the legislature? I know there have been some issues related to the way they rate people and their rankings regarding how they stand on certain issues. So, for example, the Tea Party or this group or that group might rate you and rate somebody else in relationship to the decisions that you make and how faithful you are to their values. What do you think about all that?
Well, some of them, I think, have gone from focused on, like the Tea Party, which was taxation and fiscal matters, to become ideologues. And I think they've, in certain cases, crossed over. And I helped start the one we had here for a while in El Paso. But there were, to speak firsthand, there were some issues in the legislature last year in which we were, by outside groups, given a negative rating or a minus as a part of our overall voting record if we supported the Speaker of the House in our votes to elect him as Speaker of the House, Joe Strauss.
And he's a Republican, a
He's a
Democrat,
Republican.
and
He's a
Christian,
Republican.
or
He's a Republican and a member of the Jewish faith.
okay.
And let me just say, I believe he's a very good, consistent man. And I believe the agenda we passed in the House last session was far more pro-life and every other measure or standard that
litmus test,
the litmus test would
right.
be than I felt like the Senate did. I thought we did a better job in the House, and Joe's a good man. And to me, I took great umbrage with the issue of saying that a vote for a speaker, as opposed to a vote based on an analysis of your voting record based on the outcomes of a vote on a bill, was misplaced. You know, what's the end result? What are we trying to achieve? Judge us on the basis of our votes on the final bills or coming out of committee, not on the election of a speaker, irrespective of his power. And he did a great job.
So you're saying that you think it's important to look at the actions and the outcomes more than just the faith label or lack of faith or whatever that you put on people.
What you're about and your foundations will determine the end results and how you vote. Okay? So yes, I think it's important that we understand the value structure of individuals we vote for. I do think that's important.
Okay.
That's valid.
Right.
Because to me, that will determine, when push comes to shove, how they're going to respond in a tight vote. You know, when I went down there to the House, I said publicly, I'm an El Pasoan before I'm a Republican, and I'm going to do what I think is best for this community, first and foremost, irrespective of party affiliation.
Right. Is there strong arming that takes place in terms of, you know, if you don't vote a certain way?
Well,
how does that work?
I didn't observe it firsthand in the House last time because we had such an overwhelming majority of Republicans. We had 101 Republicans. 99 were elected, 2 crossed over from the Democratic Party. So we have 150 members in the House. So it was overwhelming. You call it a supermajority. So you could disagree, and the agenda would still be passed by the speaker and whatever we decided. So I really didn't see a lot of strong arming going on. I think push comes to shove. You know, if the numbers were tighter, and I don't think they're going to be much more tight. I think we'll still have about probably 90, 95 in the House at a minimum. I don't think we'll be 101 Republicans, but it'll be a significant majority, I believe, irrespective of the national elections going on.
How does this play out in terms of are there prayer breakfasts, are there Bible studies and that kind of thing that happen, and how does that dynamic work?
Well, there are groups of believers who get together. And there were 2 groups that met. One of them had an outside chaplain. They would meet for lunch, and the other was a group of House members who would meet. I think it was on Tuesday mornings very early. My problem was, and I knew them, and I'd get with them when I could, was simply that we would have committee meetings that sometimes started. I was on appropriations, and we would meet at 7 a.m. in the morning, which precluded my ability to go
to this
fellowship.
Right. Yeah.
So, but we had some prayer breakfasts. We had one prayer breakfast, I recall, and but there are a lot of good, quality people, and some strong believers who you know, walk the talk, which is kind of my judgment. You know, are you or aren't you?
Right. Yeah. What happens when somebody doesn't walk the talk? What do you think about that? Or when they say they profess to be one thing but they act differently, does that happen a whole lot?
Oh, sure. It happens in all human nature. It happens in any arena we function as human beings.
Do you think it's worse when someone who is a professed Christian or evangelical does it versus somebody who's not?
Oh, sure.
Why is that?
Because you stepped out and said, I'm something, I'm apart from the crowd, and I'm going to live my life differently. And consistency in behavior was always is always a key to me. And I would sit back and observe, and you know that really bothers me. I will tell you there were some Democrats who I have great admiration for and respect. One in particular is Sylvester Turner out of Houston, and he's a very I'm gonna call him a liberal Democrat. He's a Democrat from Houston, but I will tell you, and we didn't vote the same way by a long shot in most cases, but he was passionate and consistent and civil the whole time, and he stuck to his positions. I would see others of either party be in a subcommittee with me, and we would take a certain vote a certain way. They'd never say anything against the vote, especially on the budget, and then we'd get into either full committee or on the House floor, and they would go to the back mic and rail against a particular issue that was voted on in subcommittee, and they never said anything about it. Mm-hmm. So I took great, I mean, that bothered me.
Yeah. That
bothered me. I think you've got to be consistent. So one of the things I was trying to do is kind of keep my mouth shut and observe and figure out who the players were and who I could trust.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Well, are there hot button issues in Texas right now that maybe are pretty controversial, falling along lines of religion? I can think of one in particular, the textbook curriculum and that kind of thing.
Well, the textbook curriculum is, and I'm not as well versed on that one as others and the state board representatives are, but this women's health issue.
Oh,
that's
yeah, right.
That's pretty critical.
What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's more. I would say this more.
By women's health, you mean the contraceptive thing? Yeah.
The issue
right.
related to women's health. It's
right.
not just contraception.
Right.
It has to do with cervical screenings and cancer screening and all of that. Uh-huh. And how we asked for a Medicaid waiver, which we've had since 2007. The legislature has voted not to have Medicaid funds go to any abortion providers. And by virtue of that, none of the Medicaid funds for the Women's Health Initiative will go to Planned Parenthood, which personally, I'll be honest, I don't have a problem with. Mm-hmm. But when you look at it in the context of what we're doing, there's about 101,000 women from a socioeconomic standpoint that get screenings in various health clinics throughout. Well, of those health clinics, and there's a federal match in this and a state match, only 2% are related to Planned Parenthood. Mm-hmm. It's such a minuscule percentage in comparison. The state of Texas asked for a waiver, which we've had, as I said, since 2007, so that we're not subject to this. There are any federal mandates, and we can delegate which recipient we want to give those funds to that are matched, that are federal dollars matched by state dollars.
Right. And
the Obama administration and by the way, we requested this, Holly, last November. So this hasn't been on, and we've had it since 2007. But they came out a week or so ago and said as of March 31st, we will no longer continue the waiver. So the state of Texas will have to, the governor has said he will make sure that our Health and Human Services budget will fund these women cancer screenings, etc. But when you go back also to the Susan B. Komen issue where they said they were not going to do grants, if you dig into that and go beyond the public rhetoric at the top end, you find that the total grant that Komen was giving to Planned Parenthood amounted to $600,000, and then the Planned Parenthood clinics don't even perform mammograms. So it really, from their standpoint, made no sense.
Right.
They refer them to mammographers,
right,
but don't perform mammograms.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's interesting.
So you kind of dig in. So, but you saw the discourse on that, and the rant and the raven,
right,
and the attacks and everything else. I think there's a little bit of this on the women's health. There's been some letters in our, to the editor. The governor has committed, and I'm in support of that as a member of the appropriations, to make sure that the dollars are there, whether the dollars are there from the federal government or they're all there from the state government to cover these needs of women for health screenings.
Mm-hmm. Now, how do these issues generally fall as far as denying the funding for abortions? Is it usually fall along party lines, or does it fall along the lines of Christian evangelicals versus not? I mean, are non-Christians also opposed to Planned Parenthood getting funding for abortions? How does that issue work out? Or maybe
Well,
you don't know the details of that. I don't know.
I can't speak for everyone.
Right.
I mean, I know how it's portrayed, and ultimately, when we take votes, we're considered Republicans and Democrats. So that's kind of how we get labeled.
Right.
And given the nature of where we are today, then the Republicans have as a part of our platforms life, and we're pro-life, and I'm very much pro-life. And I do think it fits. I have some hard dilemmas with believers I know that are Democrats who continue to take the stance of pro-abortion.
And they're strong believers, but they still feel that is the
they're
right
good
stance.
people.
Yeah.
I haven't gotten into the theology with
Right.
them and the bases, except loosely with a couple of them, and
Sure.
just to inquire. But I think the thing we have as Republicans that I feel is our values are faith and family and free enterprise, and that government needs to have a level playing field, but it shouldn't be picking winners and losers.
Right.
And we got to give everybody we're in favor of equal opportunity, but not necessarily equal outcomes.
Right. Yeah. And in terms of your own reasoning as to why you have pursued the public office, I mean, it's not the extraordinary pay that you're receiving, right?
Our compensation is $600 a month, $7,200 a year gross.
Right. So why do this? Why put yourself through this?
Well, quite candidly, I never thought I would, and I ran a couple times before I
Right.
was successful. I lost. I was just frustrated over the way I saw El Paso portrayed in our legislature. And that really came home to me this last time after serving one session. For the first, our delegation was listed by several newspapers in the state as the most improved delegation. And what it said,
By delegation, what do you mean?
I'm
Can you
talking about the
define
rest of us from El Paso, the four other Democrats and myself. I'm their lone Republican. I'm the token Republican
Right.
in our group. But we worked together on behalf of El Paso. We didn't always vote the same way on other bills, but when it came to El Paso, we worked together. That could not be said historically by others who preceded us. And fact is, El Paso disparagingly was referred to as the drama queens in the House. They didn't get along together. They fought among themselves, and it was. And I would just say simply, it's been harmful to this community for that to go on as long as it did.
So what kind of things? What was the impact of that reputation, that disharmony? How did it affect us as a community?
Well, think about it, the credibility you would have if you have a group that, we, good, bad, or otherwise, we personify El Paso. We are the face of El Paso in the legislature, in the House, in the House of Representatives. The five of us are. And if we're disjointed, not intellectually honest, not performing correctly, what's the rest of the state going to say? Someone came to me and said to me when I was with two of my other fellow House members, saying, was complimentary of us and said, y'all have done so much, y'all are working together so well. He said, you should do something big. You should really do something big for El Paso. And I said to him in front of the other two, I said, no, we should do something incremental. I said, and by incremental I mean when other members of the legislature are coming over to us to ask us for our advice on legislation that may impact El Paso as well as the rest of the state, then we're making great strides. And I think we're getting close to being able to do that. But historically, I can't say that occurred except for certain people like Joe Pickett in transportation and others who had great expertise in specific areas. But I think finally we're developing some credibility where others are coming around saying, what do you guys think? And that's just significant. That is so significant.
Is there a particular example that you can think of? Is it related to funding or related to projects? Is it all of those things that are impacted by that sort of thing?
Well, the state of Texas, I mean, they affect our tax base when it comes to property taxes, school funding, all of the above. I mean, it is
Everything.
you know, integral to,
Right.
to how we are
Right.
in El Paso. It affects transportation. The fact that the head of TxDOT is an El Pasoan and Ted Houghton, the fact that Joe Pickett is so significantly knowledgeable and experienced in transportation, that's meant a great deal to us. I would say that you know, Naomi Gonzalez and Marissa have done a great job as well, and so you know, we are impacted by the decisions that are made in Austin,
Yeah.
and so to have a platform where we can say, guys, if we raise property taxes too much, let me just tell you, let me go back. If we were to raise sales taxes, which are consumer based, and I'm in favor of that, but if we raise them, if we were to discuss raising sales taxes, then in El Paso, what happens is people will buy large items in New Mexico, okay, and they don't recognize that in Austin. I brought Lyle Larson out, a representative from San Antonio last week, to see our desalination plant. We're on the cutting edge of water conservation in the state of Texas. No one else has what we're doing. We should be taking the lead. Lyle had never been to El Paso. He'd never seen it. He was my desk mate in the house. He came out wowed by what he saw at the desal plant with Ed Archuleta and his staff, and also at UTEP in their research and what they're doing in membranes and things like that. But he had never really been here. And this is what I find. The majority of the legislators I talk to haven't really ever spent any time in El Paso. Right. They don't know us.
And they also, I find people don't have a sense of how connected we are with Juarez and the border and all of that, and that it really is.
I know we still have the violence issues we
Sure.
have to disclaim and explain and everything else. But this is just such a great community, and I just want to make sure others know about it.
Right. Now, why do you think the issue of faith lately has become so divisive on the national level as well as the state level? And with Rick Perry, remember when he did his call to prayer and all of that. Why do you think it's all of a sudden become so divisive, so
well, first
negative?
of all, remember the innate nature of man is not prone to goodness. It takes an act of will and change. And earth as we live in it, this is not heaven. You know, this is still the war. Sin is prevalent wherever out, the innate nature of man, and it's going to continue to go on. And it's not anything unusual. We can all hope and say, well, gee, you know, things ought to be nicer. There ought to be a better, I believe, a public discourse related to civility starts at the top. And until our president truly, in effect, if the case may be, turns the other cheek and acts that way, it's hard to set the tone all the way down. And I think Governor Perry did a good job in the way he conducted himself and publicly did. But you know, this is, you know, this isn't heaven. I mean, the war's gonna continue, and so I just think it's just human nature, and certain people they don't know how to deal with the value structures that we're supposed to be professing as believers.
What do you think of our understanding of how the Constitution looks at this whole issue of the role of faith in politics and government? Do you think we've gotten away from what our Constitution has said about that, or that we're still living out of that? That's the national.
Well, I can't speak as a legal expert because I'm not, and I'm not even an attorney. But my own perspective is that they didn't want us to establish a national religion for our country when it started. But to me, the values that we're supposed to be adhering to as professing believers in Christ and followers of Jesus are the basic things anybody would want from anybody. You know, to treat others as you would have them as you would be treated, and to care about your fellow man, and to look out for him, and to have an obligation. I mean, you know, the fruits of the Spirit, the thing. So I think when you judge somebody, you judge them on who they are, and it helps to have a walking, talking, professing believer,
have that consistency.
to have a consistency in their behavior.
Right. What about the whole issue of the public? It seems like El Paso has more public corruption issues than other cities in Texas. Is that true, or is that just my perception?
I don't think we're any worse than anywhere else, based on other communities that I've heard about. But we sure needed to have the light of day shining, and we need to deal with it. And you know, we've had you know, others might say a good old boy network for too long in the political process here. You know, I'll stand and say I think we need a little bit more of a bipartisan nature in this community to provide choice for people and a higher level of discernment. I think as believers we're called upon to truly make judgments based on our own personal analysis, and we're not just supposed to take everything at face value.
So it's not really a good idea to just say, well, you know, this person is a believer or this person is a certain way, so that means they're going to act a certain way. You just really have to look at ultimately how they act, what they do.
Well, the historical behavior. I think that's indicative. You know, does the walk equal the talk? You know, that's the way it boils down to, in my standpoint. And I believe that when you come to voting, and it sounds self-serving here, but I think the worst vote we can do is a straight party ticket, because first of all, not every Republican will meet the discernment that we talk about and the level of scrutiny, and not every Democrat will. So how can you know, it's like saying the party's my church. You know, it doesn't make sense.
Right. Yeah.
And so I believe the Lord, you know, gave us a brain to use.
Well, our time is out. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and thank you so much for being here, Representative Margot. And has the issue of faith and politics become more heated in the last few years? Have you been thinking about it more? Tell us what you believe and think about this issue on the social media, Facebook, Twitter, and our website. Thank you so much for watching.